So a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a really big topic right now, which is super fun to talk about, but I think a lot of people might be missing why this is actually really important to the future of Smash Bros. It's not just about getting new content for our game. We're going to talk about why it's so important a little bit later. I want to start this video by getting the most boring part of it out of the way, which is by me telling you what I would do if I was in charge of a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. You ready? I'm like weirdly nervous to admit this because of how lame and boring it is. If I was in charge of upgrading Smash Ultimate, my primary focus would be getting 3 to 5 new characters on the roster and then promising more DLC down the road. Because I think the smartest thing you can do with Smash Ultimate is continue the promise of it and continue what made it so popular, which was the characters. It's so boring, I know. There's some other small priorities I would like to have, like I strongly believe Smash should put more emphasis on alternate costumes. I'd work on getting some costumes in there. And I would also touch up the visuals here and there. I don't want to make that a huge scope idea, but some elements of Ultimate are starting to look pretty old. We can't fix all of it. We probably can't fix the ugly faces this game has, but maybe we can touch up some textures, maybe get 4K 60 going. I think that'd be nice. Whatever format you want to do it, I just want to keep the train moving, and I want to focus on the core of what people love about Ultimate, which is the characters. I think that's how you make this a healthy, successful franchise, but I know how boring that is. Let's talk about some other fun ideas real quick people might have. Other than new characters, probably the biggest thing people are going to jump to is a brand new story mode, like a true subspace style successor, and I love that idea. I'm just not sure that Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Switch games get the budget and time to pull off that idea in a way that the concept deserves. That's not something that you want to underbake, and this is of course ignoring if we could get all the third parties on board with their characters in those cinematic situations, or the fact that Sakurai doesn't even want it. I wouldn't want that to be the focal point of a Switch 2 edition because I think it would take away from a lot of other things like new characters or small little features, but also because we would be spending the bulk of our development time on something that would be instantly iconic and a huge talking point for about 2 weeks. We would absolutely enjoy it for the time it came out, and then we would move on to the next thing, and after all this time and the amount of years they would spend developing it, I don't want the comeback of Smash Ultimate to be one hot news item out of the year. I want it to be a continuing legacy that we get to keep talking about and celebrating, because that's what Smash should be. Smash is not a one-and-done flash-in-the-pan thing, which is why I'm so adamant that a Switch 2 edition should come with new DLC seasons of some variety. Keep the conversation going, keep the IP healthy, give us reasons to stay excited about this crossover. Some people may want the return of other smaller modes. I'd be excited if we got like a true break the targets back and anyone could throw out. You know, you got fans of Master Orders and Crazy Orders, Smash Run. I like Board the Platforms. It's like the lamest mode in the game, but I love it. Like, I'm a huge supporter of masterpieces coming back. A lot of people would probably want trophies in some variety or just spirits to be beefed up. And I actually think if we get a Switch 2 edition, probably some of that would work its way in because some of those ideas are really low scope, and I think Sakurai would be passionate about it as a way to beef up the value of the package. If we're gonna take the time to make a Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate, just don't be a spec bump. That's all I ask. This is too big of a deal to just be a 4K 60 FPS patch. But I don't really want to speculate the specific contents of a Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate that precisely. That's not what I think is interesting right now. I want to talk about why I think a Switch 2 edition is so important, and that actually relates to the next Smash Bros. Game. A lot of times the conversation is framed in a way where it's like people are asking themselves, what will we get next? A Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate or a new Smash game? And I think that's wrong. If I was in charge of Nintendo, if I was in charge of the Smash IP, I'm making the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate, with ongoing DLC, in order to buy us time to make the next Smash Bros. Game as big as it needs to be a success. We all know it, we say it all the time. It feels like it's a little impossible to follow up Smash Ultimate. It just seems like the project has ballooned so big that we can't keep up with it anymore. If you were going to make a new Smash game that is just purely an improvement on Ultimate, you're not cutting any corners, not trimming the roster, not taking anything away that most fans love, that's going to take so much time and so much money. And Nintendo as a company isn't really known for their huge budgets, and frankly, most Nintendo games aren't really known for having a super long development time either. Some of them do, but by and large, if Smash got a similar budget that it's always gotten and the same 3-year development window, give or take, that they've gotten in the past, you're not gonna do what Ultimate did unless you just take Ultimate and basically build an Ultimate Deluxe on top of it. And we can't just build on Ultimate forever. Again, some of those faces not really up to modern standards. So here's what this gets us. You have Sakurai come in, write a proposal for what Switch 2 Edition Smash Ultimate could be like. You get some new characters in there, some new modes, whatever, and you promise another year of DLC. I would plan for 2, but only promise 1, and if in some event it doesn't go well, you can pull back, but it'll go well. Extend that to 2 years of DLC. I would go beyond, but I'm greedy. He writes that proposal, and then he sends it off to a skeleton crew, the B team. Sakurai is not the director involved with the Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate. He goes off with the A team and begins developing the next Smash Bros. Game. And with that, he's bought himself a year, 2 years, 3 years, where the fan base is so focused on the Switch 2 edition of Ultimate and the fun continuation of the Ultimate DLC structure that we know and love, getting new characters, where he could focus on the new game and there's no pressure or time crunch or need to get it out. People are satisfied with what's going on with the Switch 2 edition. And while yeah, he would likely need an increased budget to get the next Smash game to a level where people feel it can match Ultimate. Ultimate sold so ridiculously well, I think Nintendo might actually be willing to give him a bigger budget, but also this is totally supplemented by the income coming in from the Nintendo Switch 2 edition DLC of Smash Ultimate. And what's the end goal? What's the objective of this next Smash game that's getting more time and more budget behind it? It's not just to make another one, it's to make Smash Brothers future-proof, at least for a while. Ultimate was a lot of great things, but it was not designed by Sakurai and the team to be future-proof. Let's actually use the example that I did not think was going to be so central to this video. The ugly character faces. Some of the character models aren't really holding up as well. The game clearly does not look like a 2026 Nintendo Switch 2 game. In this next Smash game with the increased resources, you do with Smash what so many other franchises have done. I'll use Pokemon as an example. When Pokemon made the transfer to 3D on the 3DS, they created 3D models for all the Pokemon, but they made them so much higher quality than the 3DS needed so that they would be future-proof. So that as the series continued onto better and better hardware, they didn't have to remake the models every time to match the new detail that hardware can handle. They made really high quality models at the start that was probably a very expensive endeavor for them, but it's paid off in not having to make new models in their future games. So yeah, I don't know how the artistic pipeline of Smash Ultimate works. Maybe you can use the Ultimate stuff as a base, maybe you can't, I don't know. But let's say you go from the ground up, we're building ultra high quality models, animations, and stages for the next Smash Bros. Game, so that when the Nintendo Switch 3 comes out, now it's 8K 120, you can bump it up and the models are ready for that new level of detail. They're not going to look out of date. And if you remember in this little hypothetical speculation I'm doing, Sakurai goes on to make the new Smash game while the Skeleton Crew B team is working on Switch 2 DLC. And that's actually so important and key to the future of Smash Bros. This is kind of spoiling a video I want to do in the future, but Sakurai cannot be our Smash director forever. We know this. And he's given his reasons before for why he thinks he is the only one that can handle Smash Brothers. We're not going to get into that today. No matter how good you are at developing Smash games, you're gonna die. Knowing a lot of cool niche SNK music does not grant immortality. I've tried. And this split development situation would force Sakurai to trust Smash Bros. Content with a new team. Ideally, the Switch 2 edition of Ultimate would be given to someone that he trusts, someone that can grow into the role of directing a Smash game, learn from that experience, and then whenever the time comes, doesn't have to be soon, Sakurai can do this till he's 90 if he wants, but eventually we have someone, we have a team that can carry the torch. And the next Smash game is built to be future-proof not only in its assets, but in its game development architecture. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for Nintendo Switch 2 would be so important because it would just be beyond exciting to see that game continue in its content. That game makes me feel like a kid, and I wasn't even a kid when it first got announced. But I strongly believe that if Nintendo can play their cards right, this strategy can correct the biggest mistake made in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is that game was not prepared to be timeless. And if there's any game that should be timeless, it is the Ultimate video game crossover. Now, I did get a little too deep in my own personal speculation there. That roadmap I laid out is what I think would be ideal, but that's not... We don't need to follow my plan one-to-one for this to be important. The important thing is that this structure allows Nintendo to get increased revenue in towards Smash Bros. And also buys the creators time to focus on the next game, and I so believe that that next game needs to be handled right in order for Smash Bros. To not be the franchise that peaked at Ultimate. I think the worst future for Smash Bros. As of today is to be remembered as the franchise that peaked at Ultimate. And as I was conceptualizing this video, I thought to myself a lot that this just sounds so un-Nintendo. Nintendo does not inflate very often. It does not increase scope very often. Huge production budgets and huge development times, that's what the bloated Western studios do. That's the failing AAA game market. Nintendo has brilliantly avoided that with smaller budgets, shorter production windows, while still somehow pumping out the quality they do. But that's not a hard, fast rule. Plenty of Nintendo's biggest franchises do actually get a very generous development window, and while we don't know the nature of their budgets, I have to imagine that something like Breath of the Wild was getting a bigger budget than Princess Peach Showtime was. And then it hit me, and maybe some of you are already thinking this, what I just laid out has actually already happened in recent Nintendo history. This was the story of Mario Kart. Now, Nintendo hasn't provided a ton of specific detail on why they made the exact decisions we made, but the broad strokes that we know about is, obviously, Mario Kart World, the latest game on Switch 2, actually started development in, I want to say, like 2017. That game was actually in development for Switch 1, but somewhere along the way in the early 2020s, Nintendo decided to instead make DLC for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the Booster Course Pass. And this allowed the development of Mario Kart World to be extended to make a Switch 2 deadline, while also boosting content for their extremely popular Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Fans got exactly what they wanted. They got a massive dump of content into Mario Kart 8, while Mario Kart World got the time it needed to cook in the oven to become the impossible, which was a game that could live up to what Mario Kart 8 was. And again, Nintendo has not confirmed this directly, but I think so many of the impossibly high-scope things that Mario Kart World accomplished, such as a huge character roster, an open-world setting, and maybe the best soundtrack in any video game, is because it got so much extra time thanks in part to the Booster Course Pass sort of staving fans off, keeping them distracted for a good 2 years to help that game develop further. And if you ask me, there is no Nintendo game in a better position to do the same thing than Super Smash Bros. Still one of their most successful IPs, has a Switch 1 game that fans desperately want to see built upon, and a potential sequel would need a tremendous amount of effort and care in order to live up to what the previous entry was. Now, no shade at Mario Kart. I actually find I love that series more and more as I get older. If we get a Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate, we can't do the booster course thing where the new content is a dramatic dip in quality. Smash Ultimate dies when its new characters start to feel like fan mods. We don't need to double content like the Booster Course Pass did. We just need to do what Ultimate did. Hopefully we can get a few new characters at launch, and then every 2 to 3 to 4 months, get a new character to keep the hype train going. And Mario Kart World found success by going in such a bold new direction for the franchise, and maybe Smash Ultimate could do that. One of the reasons I think it would be maybe a mistake to do a Subspace 2 style thing in the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate is because I don't think a Nintendo Switch 2 edition will be given the scope that a Subspace 2 deserves. But what would get that scope is a lengthy development, a well-budgeted development, for the next Smash game. Put Subspace 2 in that, and that could be legendary. And the Smash dev team is more talented than me. If they can find a bold new direction that would be excited for Smash, I'm all about it, I'm ready to hear it. But I do feel pretty strongly that we at least need to remain consistent on character roster. I'm not saying, like, I would prefer everyone is here, I think that would be ideal, but at least almost everyone needs to be here. I don't think it takes a lot of cuts before people start saying that. Once again, the franchise peaked at Ultimate. My worst case scenario. If we live in a world where we get a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Smash Ultimate, I think we need to be very excited because the pipeline, the train that we'll be on at that point, I think is going to be quite the ride. And the thought that we could be on the precipice of what could end up being Smash's greatest years if this goes well, rather than our greatest years being behind us, that just makes me excited in a way that very few things can.